Today we will talk about Bruno Latour's text regarding centers of knowledge accumulation. The idea of this text is to give us some information about how are centers of power created. What is the first way a center of power becomes a center? Latour uses a historical example of a French voyager by the name of La Pérouse, who, under the command of Louis XVI, travels to the Pacific in order to improve the maps that the French had of these regions. So the big question that La Pérouse had was if Sakhalin, was an island or a peninsula. What Latour wants to take out of this example is the idea of a great divide and how cartography reveals the production of this great divide. Latour wants to make a difference between the geographers who explicit an implicit geography of the natives. He wants to make a difference between what is considered as local knowledge that belongs to to savages and how this local knowledge somehow becomes universal knowledge of the European cartographers. So there is a step from something that is ambiguous and inaccurate and unsubstantiated, something that is not considered science but a belief, a system of beliefs of a group of local people, and it is suddenly transformed into precise and informed knowledge of the European cartographers. And what is surprising about La Pérouse's story is that he only stays one day in Sakhalin. So Latour asks, why such a hurry? Why didn't La Pérouse stay a few more days? Why did he just arrive to this faraway land, ask a few questions to the locals, and then leave? Why didn't he do much more research inland? Why didn't he stay longer? And what Latour answers is that La Pérouse did not want to stay longer in these faraway lands because he was not really interested in Sakhalin. He was interested in the idea of taking Sakhalin back, first to his ship and finally to Versailles, to where the King of France resided. So how does La Pérouse take Sakhalin back to France? He draws it. He draws this unknown land into a map, and the map allows him to take the information back to the center. Latour is trying to make us understand what the dynamics of a specific power struggle work. Latour defines this concept of cycles of accumulation. If you see the diagram that I took from your readings, there is a center where you have the X1, X2, and X3. Those represent different expeditions that go out from France, for example. And they all go to the periphery and then come back to the center. The first X1, for example, the first expedition doesn't come back. They probably had troubles in their voyages and could never come back to the center. But number 2 and number 3 could come back. So when number 2 comes back to the center, the second expedition brings a lot of information back to the center. And this allows for the third expedition to go out into the world, not empty-handed, but with maps and descriptions of peoples and geographies that allow for the expeditioners to have a much easier task than the first Europeans who ventured into the outside world of Europe. So what this system of cycles of accumulation does is that although at first there, in the case of La Pérouse, there's not much difference between the ability of the French and the Chinese sailors, the difference will start to become greater and greater if La Pérouse is part of a network, precisely what the drawing is trying to interpret. La Pérouse is part of a network through which knowledge of the Pacific ethnogeography accumulates in Europe. Latour says that slowly a certain asymmetry begins to take shape between the Chinese, who are considered as locals, and the itinerant geographers, who will become later the owners of universal knowledge. Following the example of La Pérouse, the Neptune, that is the ship that will sail after La Pérouse, brings back the information to Europe. This ship will be better prepared to domesticate the Chinese, since aboard the ship they will know in advance information about these faraway lands. So they will have a head start over the Chinese. Finally, what is important of Latour's reading for our class is that he allows us to answer this question of how is it possible to act at a distance on events, places, and people that are not familiar to us. And that is precisely what a center of power does. In the case of our example, France or Europe, they have, as a center of power, they have the ability to act at a distance. How is this possible? So Latour gives us one idea, and this is the concept of immutable and combinable mobiles. An immutable and combinable mobile, by definition, for Latour is the map, is the result of La Pérouse's voyage. He draws a map, and this map allows to take Sakhalin back to the center. It is immutable because by drawing the map on a piece of paper, different from the map that the Chinese draw on the sand, by drawing it on a piece of paper, it will not change. It is immutable. It will resist the travels back, the navigation back to the center, and it will keep this valuable information. So that's why it's immutable. And it is combinable because once it arrives to the center, the map that La Pérouse produces will begin a dialogue with maps that were drawn by previous cartographers, and also will have a dialogue with maps that future cartographers will draw. So that's why it is combinable. It will allow for information to accumulate. And the last idea is that it is mobile because you can move a map from the periphery to the center. So how does a center act at a distance? One idea is that it accumulates knowledge by building these immutable and combinable mobiles.